Next reading from the Scriptures. Today from Exodus chapter 32, verses 1 through 14. When the people saw that Moses was so long in coming down from the mountain, the people gathered against Aaron and said to him, "Come, make us a god who shall go before us." That man Moses, who brought us up from the land of Egypt, we don't know what happened to him. Aaron said to them, "Take off the gold rings that are on the ears of your wives, your sons, and your daughters, and bring them to me." And all the people took off the gold rings that were in their ears and brought them to Aaron. And he took them from them and cast it in a mold, made it into a molten calf. They exclaimed, "This is your God, O Israel, who brought you out of the land of Egypt." When Aaron saw this, he built an altar before it, and Aaron announced, "Tomorrow shall be a festival of the Lord." Early next day, people offered up burnt offerings, brought sacrifices of well-being, and they sat down to eat and drink, and then rose to dance. The Lord spoke to Moses, "Hurry down, for your people, whom you brought out of the land of Egypt, have acted basely. They have been quick to turn aside from the way that I enjoined upon them. They've made themselves a molten calf and bowed low to it and sacrificed to it, saying, 'This is your God, O Israel, who brought you out of the land of Egypt.'" The Lord further said to Moses, "I see that this is a stiff-necked people. Now let me be, that my anger may blaze forth against them, that I may destroy them and make of you a great nation." But Moses implored the Lord his God, saying, "Let not your anger, O Lord, blaze forth against your people, whom you delivered from the land of Egypt with great power and with a mighty hand. Let not the Egyptians say it was with evil intent that he delivered them, only to kill them off in the mountains and annihilate them from the face of the earth. Turn from your blazing anger and renounce the plan to punish your people. Remember your servants, Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, how you swore to them by yourself and said to them, 'I will make your offspring as numerous as the stars of heaven. I will give your offspring this whole land of Israel, of which I spoke, to possess forever.' And the Lord renounced the punishment he had planned to bring upon his people. Grass withers and the flower fades, but the word of the Lord lives forever." And this is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Who shall go before us? The Israelites wanted to know. At the foot of Mount Sinai, they haven't seen Moses for a while now. And since they haven't seen Moses for a while, as he's been up on the mountain talking to God, just as he said he was going to be, and just as they requested of him when they were saying, "You go talk to God, we'll stay right here." Well, he's up there. Takes a bit longer than expected, sure. 40 days, 40 nights, that's a while, over a month. And surely they can see that thunderstorm and fire and stuff on top of the mountain. Maybe not totally understanding it, but sure they can see it. So what does it mean? As far as they can tell, if Moses was gone, then God was gone too. Neither was the case, of course. Moses and God were still up there talking, working some more things out. Those 10 Commandments led to some more instructions how to behave as God's people. They spend a good amount of time talking about the tabernacle, how to build it, what it's going to look like, what stuff it's going to be made of. It's an architect's dream in those couple of chapters to see how the tabernacle is all to be set up. God's temporary home with the people at the foot of the mountain. And just as God and Moses were wrapping things up there, the people they fall to their misunderstanding and their frustration, their impatience, their anxieties. That man Moses, who brought us out of Egypt, we don't know what happened to him. Come, make us a god who shall go before us. Enough time passed for them without witnessing another huge miracle from God. They figured they were all alone out there in the desert. Enough time had passed since they'd seen that Moses character who was kind of the face of God for them, an image of God, if you will. Remember, there was no concept of this kind of faith that we carry on today for them. They didn't quite understand this and didn't have the experience of it as we do. It's not as familiar to them. Every god they were familiar with had a face, an image, something they could design out of the stuff they had. An image of God was what they were looking for, something tangible, something they could see, something they could touch to help them feel a connection to the great beyond. Without that, who's to say anything's there, right? Now, we have had the no idolatry thing drilled into us for a few thousand years now, so it seems a little more commonplace for us. And paganism is not the popular force in the world today that it used to be, so we may feel a little removed from this concept of needing something tangible to be an image of God for us. But then again, maybe we are not as removed from it as we'd like to think we are. Maybe we are still, even in this crazy story, a bit more like these ancient Israelites than we care to admit. We Christians, we look to quite a few things for some kind of image of God. You ever worn a cross necklace? Ever thought about that Bible of yours? Ever taken special care to keep it off the floor, or to put it on the top shelf, put it on top of every other book because it is the most important? This one has God in it. Right? And not to criticize any of that. I mean, these are kind of a part of our basic Christian tradition building blocks. There's nothing wrong with wearing a necklace to remind us of who we are and whose we are, as long as that's what it is, a reminder. It's not actually carrying the presence of God. And the Bible, nothing's wrong with treating the Bible as special as it is, but what good is a Bible that we're not opening up and reading? I mean, really. We also have all kinds of statues and paintings and artwork and all kinds of things that we treat in similar ways, as though those objects are just holy in themselves in that they carry the presence of God. One might argue that we've even been able to turn church buildings into an image of God. And again, not to be critical of anyone treating these things as special as they really are. It doesn't take away from how special they are, as long as we're not falling into thinking that that's something that you have to carry around the presence of God with you. I mean, you see, I do the same thing. You look at my office, I got my whole top shelf is full of Bibles. And that's very intentional. That's where the Bibles go. They're special. There's nothing wrong with treating those things well. I've worn cross necklaces in my life that I wouldn't leave home without. And we were just watching a show that just came out the other day, new episode of a show yesterday. And in that show, there was this mother and her daughter, and the mother was giving her daughter a cross necklace. And the daughter was having kind of a crisis of faith, and she's like, "No, I don't want it. I won't wear it. I won't wear it." And then her mom was like, "Well, just keep it with you. I'll feel better." This idea of carrying around the presence of God in an image, it's not only an ancient idea. Now, I'll invite you to go there with me for a moment to turn this story on its head. Imagine that it's us down there at that time, seeing nothing but a thunderstorm and fire on a mountain for over a month in the middle of an empty desert. Our only concepts of the divine are wrapped into the special things that we hold so dear. And the only one who's been interpreting this whole thing with the cloud and the fire and all that other stuff, the only one who's been interpreting this stuff for us is gone. Our pastor, our shepherd. That good-for-nothing person is nowhere to be found now. We're starting to wonder if God is still with us. Because no one is here telling us that God is with us. We don't have anything to look at and to hold to tell us that God is with us. So we turn to our nearest deacon. And I say deacon because this is kind of how I see Aaron. He was a high priest just like Moses was. But if the difference between the two, Moses was kind of more the pastor, elder, taking care of the spiritual health. And Aaron did more of the hard labor. Remember, Aaron had to speak for Moses because he didn't speak well. And now we find Aaron being asked for his services with this calf. They look straight to Aaron for him to physically make an image of God for them. And he didn't refuse them. He kind of worked with them. So we turned to our nearest deacon like, well, that good-for-nothing pastor is gone, isn't he? Let us out here to die. All right, Mr. Deacon Priest, make us a cross. Make us a Bible. Make us something to tell us that our God is actually with us. And Aaron, instead of correcting him, instead of getting him back spiritually on track, he does his best. He puts together this thing for him. He's trying to smooth things over. And the scripture is critical for Aaron giving up to them and letting them get out of control, but otherwise he's pretty much off the hook. He was just trying to smooth things over. Aaron collected their gold and made a calf for them with it. Then he tried to use that to redirect their attention toward God, who actually brought them out of Egypt. Now, I know that seems kind of confusing, because especially with the English translations of this passage, it contributes to the confusion. You can see it in the language, what they're asking for and what it is that Aaron's trying to do. Because when Aaron built the altar before the calf, he said to them, "Tomorrow shall be a festival to Yahweh," to the Lord. The Lord in capital letters. It's going to be a festival to Yahweh, the same God that they've been following this whole time. Where what they asked for, they said, make us a God, make us an Elohim. And that's like the generic word for God. That can be used for a great God. That could be used for any other God. It just kind of depends how it's used in the sentence. So they said, make us an Elohim. And then Aaron said, here you go. This is Yahweh. So it's kind of a weird way to direct them back towards God. Not totally sufficient, still problematic. But that's what he was trying to do. So, basically, this passage isn't really just about turning to other gods, like we traditionally think that it probably is. It's about the Israelites' desire for an image of God, a God they were following. A calf would have been a very recognizable idol for them, something very familiar. So, in essence, Aaron was giving them something familiar, something tangible to see and to have with them to help them connect to the great beyond, so that they would know that God had not abandoned them. I wonder if Aaron himself wasn't having doubts about the whole thing. Maybe he was also yearning for something tangible, something more familiar. Whatever the case, the people now had their image of God in this calf. They got up early the next day, offering with their offerings, making sacrifices, eating and drinking, dancing till they just couldn't dance anymore. A festival for the one who brought them out of Egypt, who was now looking to them less like Moses and more like a golden calf. Meanwhile, up on the mountain, the one who actually brought them out of Egypt the one who has no simple image that you can sculpt out of gold or anything else, was watching and getting absolutely furious, seeing a stiff-necked people reverting back to their familiar ways of relying on a hunk of metal to be a divine presence with them. Even while God was right there with them, up on the mountain in the cloud and the fire, while they were at the foot of the mountain down below. God just about went down and wiped them all out for it. God was so angry. As if there was a golden calf that would cause those plagues and everything that freed them from Egypt. As if a golden calf split the sea, dropped manna and quail out of heaven, sent forth water from a rock, formed pillars of fire and cloud and thunderstorms, and were giving commandments to help the people know how to live right. But thankfully, Moses steps in for them. Moses appeals to God through God's character. As we see God's character through what through what God does. We see God's presence through what God does. So Moses is appealing to who God is and what God does to change God's mind. But that's not who you are. Remember your servants, Abraham, Isaac, and Israel. Your promise to them, you swore to them by yourself, by your own presence. If you give in to your anger right now, you're going to look like something that you're not. And so Moses was able to talk God down from that anger. And then, of course, after all this, when Moses goes down, he himself gets just as mad as God did. And he does fall to his own anger, and it becomes quite a scene down there. Now, I could go on forever about this story. This story is fascinating, interesting to deal with. But what to do with this for today? Perhaps as we consider how much we rely on physical, tangible images of God to convince us that God is actually with us, be it a cross or a Bible or anything else. We might also consider other things that we try to pair together with the intangible, invisible, and eternal presence of God. Well, right now we've got an election coming up, don't we? Tell you what, sure do. Far too many of us, in my perspective at least, far too many of us think that one party or another is akin to the presence of God, is carrying the presence of God, while the other party is just evil. And yes, we do it on both sides. This is not to pick on one side or the other. We're divided and angry, pointing out each other on opposite sides as being like the devil incarnate because of who we prefer to vote for. Many of us are hollering out for the image of God to go before us because things are so messed up. We're going to make vote the right decision, and then God's going to lead us forward in the right way. As if God's presence comes in the form of Republican or Democratic. Well, neither side is much more than a golden calf. There never has been and never will be anything on this earth that can adequately serve as an image of God, other than Jesus Christ himself, of course, and we don't even know what he looked like. Perhaps instead of our slapping an image that we're familiar with together with an idea of God for us to follow, perhaps we can grow to see the intangible and invisible eternal presence of God already leading us. May we grow to see and receive God as God actually is. It's an eternal, invisible presence with us. Always with us. Maybe not always happy about how we act. Maybe sometimes very angry about how we act. Nevertheless, always loving us and always calling us to love each other. Well, no matter what happens with the election, with COVID, with unemployment, with all the racism, and with whatever else is going on around us, may we and the world come to see God's true presence going before us, as we share God's love and compassion and God's grace with each other.